It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning. I'm David Furst, WNYC's Weekend Edition host, filling in for Brian. And now we continue our WNYC Centennial Series, 100 Years of 100 Things. And we've made it up to Thing 48, 100 Years of New York City Christmas Traditions. Our guide for this is Valerie Paley, former chief historian at New York Historical, now senior vice president and director of its library, as well as the founding director of its Center for Women's History, and we are told its resident expert on Christmas traditions in New York. Welcome.
Thank you, David.
Justified title there?
I don't know. I think that others would compete with that mantle, but I'm here with you today.
It's great to have you with us. And listeners, from Midtown's Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade that ushers in Santa Claus, to the Rockettes, the Rockefeller Center tree, to the Nutcracker at Lincoln Center. I mean, there's a reason why we have so many gridlock alert days around the holidays as families are traveling to all of the hot spots in the city to keep their traditions going. Let's hear your oral histories of how these places and performances have become secular family Christmas rituals, or maybe your family has other special Christmas displays that you go to check out or shows that you leave home for every year. Yes, we are focusing on the secular or commercial, not the religious side of the holiday today. Tell us your story. 212-433 WNYC. That's 212-433-9692. You can call or text. And Valerie, since we're talking about Christmas in New York City, before we get to the 20th century items I mentioned, can we start a bit before 1924 and acknowledge how much the country owes to New York in how Christmas is celebrated, especially when it comes to Santa Claus?
Oh, absolutely. And now you're in my wheelhouse because I was told it was only the last 100 years, but I represent New York's first museum, which just celebrated its 220th anniversary.
Wow.
So we go way back, and we have stories from way back. And of course, Santa Claus is very much associated with New York. Because he was particularly celebrated in the Netherlands, where there was a holiday called Sinterklaas, which happens annually on December 6th, just last week. And the Dutch, to whom we owe our lineage, brought their devotion to St. Nicholas with them to New Amsterdam. And New Yorkers of Dutch and other heritages grew up in the late 17th and 18th centuries celebrating this form of the holidays represented by this Sinterklaas fellow. And as we move along into the Revolution and the British takeover of New York, of New Amsterdam, when it became New York, we developed an additional interest in Dutch culture because funnily enough, because of a distaste for the British after the U.S. gained its independence. So, little fun fact there. Washington Irving, the humorist of the 19th century, wrote a satirical history of Dutch New York under the pen name Diedrich Knickerbocker. And he mingled these historical facts with his own imagination, wrote up this image of St. Nicholas as having a broad hat, a long pipe. Many of the iconography, the image that we have of Santa Claus now comes from this. And we are quite delighted to, as New York Historical's first museum, to have been associated with Washington Irving and some of his cohort, including John Pintard, founder of the New York Historical. He loved this idea of closely associating St. Nicholas with New York City, and even tried unsuccessfully to get St. Nicholas, i.e. Santa Claus, named the patron saint of New York. So we then moved to, the Clement Clark Moore the night before Christmas. He was also a big New York Historical member. He wrote this famous poem about St. Nick over in Chelsea, where he worked. I think we owe a lot, or New Yorkers are very much are associated with Santa Claus and the holidays, and it goes way back to
well,
the
it certainly
19th
caught
century.
on.
Oh, yeah.
And now I might have to pull you out of your wheelhouse there because moving into the
Okay.
last 100 years now, 1924 was the first Macy's parade, which was originally called a Christmas parade, and even now, as the Thanksgiving parade, ushers in Santa Claus.
Exactly.
What
Exactly. And
inspired this parade?
yes, well, the first one, the first Thanksgiving Day parade was in 1924, 100 years ago, and it was called the Macy's Christmas Parade. The name changed in 1927 to the Thanksgiving Parade. And it featured the first parade featured costumed employees, floats, bands, animals on loan from the Central Park Zoo, which was a little bit dicey. And it celebrated Macy's newly expanded Herald Square location that year, which was at that time the largest retail store in the world. And it kicked off, as it still does in many ways, the official start of the holiday retail season.
Mm.
So it was, a group of workers at Macy's. They were mostly European immigrants, and they wanted to celebrate American Thanksgiving with a European parade tradition. So the first parade had a kind of festive, homegrown, Macy's quality to it, which we still see, although the parade route has changed. It originated in Harlem originally, and now it originates at our very corner, 77th and Central Park
Mm.
West, where our headquarters are of New York Historical. So we feel very, very akin to that parade as well.
Has
Um,
Santa always played a prominent role in the parade?
Indeed, he has. He always brought up the rear, except for in 1932 when he actually led the parade. I'm not sure what was so special about
Interesting.
1932 that that was the case, but in fact, yes, he's always been very much a part of this, and it has a sort of a dramatic wow finish to quite the festive harbinger of the holiday
I mean, you really
season.
can't follow Santa, right? That's a tough job. Now, listeners,
No, so best that he takes it up.
that's
It's at
exactly
the very
right.
end. He's the finale, right? Exactly.
Now, listeners, do you take part in any of the big New York City Christmas traditions? The Rockettes, anyone? Rockefeller Center, call or text 212-433 WNYC. That's 212-433-9692. And I just mentioned the Rockettes. One of the groups that appears in the Macy's parade is the Rockettes. They also take center stage at the annual Radio City Christmas Spectacular. And I understand they are also exactly 100 years old, but they started in St. Louis. So
They did.
when did they become part of New York's Christmas?
Well, they were founded in St. Louis in 1925. They became very closely associated with Radio City Music Hall as the opening night act in 1932. Their first Christmas spectacular, Rockettes, was in 1933 and premiered these iconic numbers, which are still done, such as the March of the Wooden Soldiers,
Hmm.
and of course the Living Nativity at the Christmas show, which it's still performed today. And the Rockettes officially became the Radio City Music Hall Rockettes in 1934. As for the parade, they performed in every Macy's parade since 1957. So,
Hmm.
I think that it's safe to say the Rockettes are no longer associated with St. Louis, but with New York City and Radio City.
Wow. Well, we have a text right now, someone writing in to talk about a lovely twist on a New York annual Christmas tradition. The text says, my daughter dancing in the Nutcracker at New York City Ballet at Lincoln Center. It's as magical for the student dancers as it is for the audience. And last night after the show, we were riding the subway home to Brooklyn, and she met some New Yorkers who had just attended the show as part of their annual tradition, and she was able to regale them with some backstage stories. It was an only in New York holiday moment playing out.
How wonderful. That's so exciting. And having been a ballet dancer myself,
Mm.
growing up with the Joffrey Ballet, but growing up with the New York City Ballet and the Nutcracker, that is a story that's very near and dear to me. So congratulations. It's
That is
great.
a wonderful story. Thank you so much for sharing. And let's talk a little bit more about that great New York holiday tradition, New York City Ballet's Nutcracker. I mean, everyone seems to put on a production of the Nutcracker at this time of year, right? The Tchaikovsky Ballet. But this really is a New York City tradition as well.
Absolutely. And I think that just the stagecraft of the New York City Ballet's version it can't be beat. And the way that that particular uh, the choreography, the use of children from the School of American Ballet,
Hmm.
which is the parent school of the City Ballet. It all comes together in such a beautiful and magical way, and I think there's something for everybody in that particular ballet. It was, of course, choreographed by George Balanchine, who arrived in New York in 1933. Courtesy of the arts patron Lincoln Kirstein, who wanted to create an American ballet company, and Balanchine was his man. Interestingly enough, about George Balanchine, he danced. The ballet itself originated in Russia. Of course, it was commissioned by Marius Petipa of the Russian Imperial Ballet in 1892, and there was choreography by Lev Ivanov, and the Petipa Ivanov version is always sort of like it's very much a touchstone for all versions of the Nutcracker, and of course the famous music by Tchaikovsky.
Hmm.
But Balanchine himself, the founder of the New York City Ballet, in 1919 danced the role of the prince in the Nutcracker himself. 5 years later, that iconic year, 1924, Balanchine left the Soviet Union and he never returned. He began performing with the Ballet Russe, but with Diaghilev. But he arrived in New York in 1933, and then he, with Kirstein, founded the now world famous School of American Ballet the next year, and then the New York City Ballet in 1948. So, I don't need to overstate Balanchine's importance in the history of dance, but he's our man because he served as the ballet master and chief choreographer of New York City Ballet until his death in 1983. But the thing about the Nutcracker, which is so fabulous. I mean, interestingly, some of the original 1954 costumes, that were designed by Barbara Karinska, are still in use. The
Wow.
actual costumes themselves, the
I mean,
grandmother's cape, and some embroidery on the some of the women's costumes in the tea dance from Act Two.
such
Yeah,
a magical tradition, a magical production, and a smart idea too, right? Including that many children on stage always helps to sell tickets to families, right?
absolutely. I hear that a great deal of New York City Ballet's revenue comes from just the few weeks that they perform the Nutcracker
Is that right?
in the winter. Yes. But what's so interesting, the dramatic stage effects, this Christmas tree that grows to from 12 to 41 feet, and the snow and the flying sleigh, all of these are just so, just magical, and really do depict, the magic of the holidays and of Christmas.
Hmm.
And yeah, I think that also one interesting thing I mentioned, I was a ballet dancer myself. I was always fascinated by some of the stage tricks, like for example, the Sugar Plum Fairy seems to glide across the stage in Act Two, Pas de Deux, and that's apparently something that Balanchine picked up from his days in Russia. The ballerina steps onto like a little metal plate. Somebody backstage pulls this plate. It's on a string, and so she glides. It's not like she's really gliding, but it's like there's some of these little tricks that are wonderful to watch for in this particular iteration of the ballet.
We're speaking with Valerie Paley with New York Historical, and we're talking about New York City's Christmas traditions. We were talking about the Rockettes just a little bit before and how they started in St. Louis. And let's hear from Charles calling in to talk about the Rockettes. Welcome to the Brian Lehrer Show.
Hey, thank you very much. I wanted to tell your lovely guest that I studied a script once. 'Cause I'm an artist, but I worked as a tour guide, and it was at Rockefeller Center where they talked about the guy that changed the name from the Rockets to the Rockettes. It was I think, two sisters that danced in a part of Missouri, and they were on a Broadway show called Ham and Eggs or something. The guy that produced the Rockettes saw them, liked their name, but the name was really the Rockets, and it got changed to the Rockettes.
Yes,
And
the
I'm sorry,
Missouri
go ahead.
Rockets. I see this in my notes. Yes.
So they were
Yeah,
originally
and
the
the other one-
Rockets.
Yeah, the Rockets. And then I wanted to say also that a friend of mine whose great ancestor is in the Met, Thomas Sully. He's a painter. My friend is Thomas Sully III. His wife's a writer. One day we had dinner with Balanchine's daughter. So I just want to leave you with that little story.
Thank you so much, Charles. And we also have a text about the Rockettes. Someone writing in to say, I sat next to a Rockette at a Bruce Springsteen concert at Madison Square Garden. She was lovely, and I got some insider information about some of the older numbers, including the one where they all fall backwards slowly, which is one of the coolest things I have ever seen. Go see it.
That, of course, is in the March of the Wooden Soldiers, and I think everyone waits for that grand finale where they all fall down. That's great.
Thank you for the context there. We're getting some great texts. You can also call with your New York City Christmas traditions. Maybe it's one of the ones we are mentioning. Maybe it's something we don't even know about. 212-433-WNYC. That's 212-433-9692. Rockefeller Center, home to Radio City, and of course is a huge draw at Christmas with the tree and the skating rink. The tree came first, right? What's the story of how that came to be such an iconic New York City thing?
Well, it happened just somewhat by happenstance, which is great. It's wonderful when such things happen so successfully. The tree, there was this it was while Rockefeller Center was being constructed, and so there was this big hole there in the ground, and the tree was initially put up by Italian American construction workers in 1931. The original tree, the first one, was a 20-foot balsam, and of course, in the depths
20
of the
foot.
Great 20 feet, that's all. And in the depths of the Great Depression, it was very sparsely decorated with garlands handmade by the workers' families. And this is an interesting thing that I never knew before, and I learned it researching this segment. Because the workers were excavating the site, they had access to the tinfoil ends of the blasting caps that were being used to excavate the site, and they used these caps to add a little bit of zhuzh and sparkle to this tree, which I think is kind of wonderful. Just very like a handmade, homegrown sort of tree. So the New York Times actually reported the name of the man who first brought the tree and bought it and set it up. And it was a man named Cesidio Peruzza. He was an Italian immigrant from the Lazio region. So wonderful to have this kind of very, crowdsourced thing that was not nearly as commercial as it is now, for sure. The first tree lighting ceremony took place in 1933, and after that, it became an annual tradition.
Yeah, do you know when it became this national broadcast with celebrity performers like today?
Well, it was first televised in 1951, so I'm not sure if it was nearly as elaborate as it is now, but it's been on TV since then, and certainly because of because of just its broadcast all over the place. As with the case of the Thanksgiving Day Parade, New York becomes central in this holiday story.
Right up to the ball drop, New Year's Eve as well.
Exactly, that too.
Our guide for all of this today is Valerie Paley, former chief historian at New York Historical. We're getting some great calls right now. Let's hear from Molly in Brooklyn. Welcome.
Hi there. How are you?
Great. Do you have a tradition you want to tell us about?
I do. Yeah. So my favorite holiday tradition actually takes place in Brooklyn every year. It's been on a bit of a hiatus the last few years, and they're coming back. It's a Charlie Brown Christmas Live in Brooklyn, and it's the most charming tradition. It's just the sweetest show. They do sort of verbatim the cartoon that we all know. They do all the voices, they do the movements, and very affordable show, and all the money they make goes to a different charity every year. So supporting a good cause there too. That
sounds great. Could you tell us again how to get tickets?
Yeah, so if you go, the ticket link is sort of long. If you go to a website called Brown Paper Tickets, and in the search bar, just search for Charlie Brown Christmas, it's the first thing that will pop up, and you can buy your tickets right there. It runs the 21st and 22nd.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing that. We're getting some texts and calls as well. Let's take another call. Rachel calling in. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to the Brian Lehrer Show.
Hi. So when I was a little girl in the 60s, early 60s, my brother's godmother, and now I'm having a blank, Diana, it'll come to me as I'm talking to you. See, I'm aging. Was one of Valentine's favorites, and she was a principal dancer, and she played Sugar Plum Fairy, and we used to get to go. We were kind of a poor family, but our mother was trying to break into theater, and our father was in network news, sort of, and they knew the most interesting people, and we used to get to go and have these incredible seats, and then go to New York City Ballet and see the ballet and go backstage and go under the big dress.
Oh, wow.
That was my most vivid memory of it. And it was just the most incredible thing. And then taking my daughter years later, who grew up kind of around the country with me as I worked in children's hospitals, when she was a teenager, and telling her about the magic of doing that when I was a child was just so much fun, because then my best friend's husband was the orchestra manager. And so I took my daughter as a teenager, and we got to go backstage, and it was kind of, wow, coming all around again.
I mean, that's the tradition right there, your memory and then bringing your daughter. Thank you so much for sharing that, Rachel.
And perhaps the Diana you're thinking of is Diana Adams. She was a big ballerina in that period that you're talking of.
Mother's godmother, yeah, Diana Adams. Yep,
good.
And really cool. She was married to Gus Allegretti at the time, and so he was the puppeteer on Captain Kangaroo.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Wow. Thank you for filling in that blank, Valerie. And Valerie, I think everything is your wheelhouse, quite frankly.
No.
Another text here. New York City was a big part of our Christmas tradition. Every year we bundled up and rode the train from Westport to tour the department store windows. B. Altman and Company, Lord and Taylor's, and more. We also we always saw the tree at Rockefeller, and some years we skated or saw the Rockettes at Radio City. And every year we always lit a candle at St. Patrick's Cathedral. Best time of year.
Yeah.
And let's hear, oh my goodness, we're getting a lot of great calls. Let's hear from Robert calling in from Ellicott City, Maryland. Welcome to the Brian Lehrer Show.
Hi, folks. How are you? Can you hear me?
Absolutely, yeah. Do you have a Christmas tradition?
Great. Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, hi, New York. And I just want to say Brian Lehrer should be in charge of achieving peace in the Middle East. I believe he could do it. He's wonderful. He's a real gem. This is really, my call is a sort of a tribute to my mother, who would be 100 years old this year, too. She passed away at 98 2 years ago. Her favorite thing in New York for Christmas, among a lot of things, was the tree at the Met, which I think doesn't get a lot of mention all the time. But their tree is wonderful, and not only is it wonderful, but you're also inside the Met. So you can go and see all the other amazing, joyful pieces of art that are there during Christmas and, of course, all year round. Now, me personally, I worked at B. Altman's in 1978, 79, while I was waiting to get accepted to law school, and I was in the menswear department. So I got to see the designers from the store installing the windows, which was really magical to go from a kid and seeing them on the street on Fifth Avenue with the chestnuts roasting and the hot dogs and all of that. And then to be behind the scenes where they did that was really a joyful experience. May have been the best job I've ever had. And I've been a judge and I'm a law professor now. I'm not even kidding. The Altman's was a perfect place to work.
Oh,
but
my
I really
goodness.
wondered if your guests could talk a little bit about the windows at the department stores, because I think that just says it all about Christmas
yes.
in New York.
Robert, thank you so much for sharing. And Valerie, let's hear about that. Robert, let me just mention Ellicott City, a gorgeous downtown as well. So enjoy new traditions there. But Valerie, let's hear about those windows.
Well, yes, I mean, the windows are certainly very much a staple of Christmas and the holidays in New York. But I'm sorry, David, I have to say that that tradition goes back to the 1870s.
Your comfort
and
zone.
actually, it's because technological advances made plate glass windows financially feasible in America, which is interesting. I have a couple fun facts from the past about store windows. Some people may know that L. Frank Baum, who wrote The Wizard of Oz, wrote about store windows before he wrote that book for which he's famous. Also, some artists you would never associate with store windows were window dressers earlier in their careers. Salvador Dali, Andy Warhol, Jasper Johns, and Robert Rauschenberg. Can you believe that? I can't, but it's in my notes. But in any case, I think since we were talking about Rockefeller Center, I think of Saks, which is Saks Fifth Avenue, which is right across the street. And that store was completed in 1924, our year, 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And it opened in September. And it's interesting how Saks move uptown really is like kind of a zoning triumph of the Fifth Avenue Association, which the idea in that period was to move from a residential area to make this the premier location for luxury shopping and fashion. And so Saks was very much this 1920s icon. And Fifth Avenue Association, shout out to them. They just celebrated their 200th anniversary.
Wow.
And their effort was to pass a zoning law that would allow the city to restrict trade and industries in certain districts of the city. And Saks is part of it. And so the way this March of Fifth Avenue, I mean, your guest was talking about the Altmans. I remember Lord and Taylor as well.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And then Saks and then Bergdorf's, all of these windows become, certainly a retail draw, but also just another one of these magical traditions.
And burned into our memories. And thanks, everybody, for sharing some of your traditions and memories today. And Valerie, before we let you go, does New York Historical have some Christmas events coming up that might become traditions?
Oh my gosh, isn't that we do have our regular train show. We have a monumental collection of historic trains that we put up every year. They're so popular that actually we're creating a permanent space for them, because these historic trains are not just model trains. They're actually they're from the 19th and early 20th century, and they speak a lot to our collective American past. And we try to use these objects to tell larger stories. But they, of course, the whole idea of like model trains are always associated with the holidays. Children love to come see them
goodness.
in our space, and so much so I, as a curator, get a little bit irritated that we keep them up until March. And I was like, can we please take these things down? So
well, now they're going to stick around all the time.
And now that'll be around all the time, and in our Demented Children's History Museum on our lower level. So we're very, very fortunate to have Christmas all the time, but history all the time at the New York Historical.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. I have so many more questions I want to get to, but thank you, Valerie Paley, former chief historian at New York Historical, now senior vice president and director of its library, as well as the founding director of its Center for Women's History. They are at 77th Street and Central Park West, and there's more information at nyhistory.org. Valerie, thanks again.
Thank you, David.